Hi, I'm Mike Reynolds, a senior reporter covering the media industry with S&P Global Market Intelligence, Tech, Media, and Telecom News Team. Welcome to Media Talk, a podcast hosted by S&P Global, wherein the news and research staff explore issues in the ever-evolving media landscape. Today, I'm joined by Justin Nielson, Principal Analyst at S&P Global Market Intelligence, Kagan. As Head of Research at Kagan, Justin's expertise extends across broadcast, network, sports, and streaming video. He also knows a bit about digital audio, or what some of us old-timers more pointedly call radio. Justin recently authored Kagan's radio and TV station Annual Outlook 2025. At MediaTalk, we often delve into the world of TV and its various permutations, but today, Justin's going to give us more equal time to radio. Justin, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for having me.
We're going to start with where the radio market is today and get a sense for where Kagan and Justin think it's going to be out to 2030, which is the outlook period. Justin can give us an overview about the dynamics shaping the radio world and its myriad facets today.
So I'll just take a step back, and we're talking about broadcast radio. So AM, FM radio, the old standard media. And it's been through some cyclical struggles in terms of shifting to digital. More people are consuming audio in different ways on different apps. But AM, FM radio has been fairly resilient in terms of free to air, the music and the DJs and the talent that it provides. But looking at the financials, so it's seen a dip since the pandemic. It hasn't really rebounded to where it was in the levels prior to 2020. And we're expecting it not to grow very substantially over the next 5-10 years as well.
Again, you mentioned the pandemic. Again, most of us stopped going to work there. Everybody worked from home, and many of us are still doing that. So that's one factor. And also, I think some of the car manufacturers, Justin, are not installing AM radios with the new vehicles.
Yeah, it's all based on the new push towards EVs and the interference that AM plays in terms of its lower frequency band and a little bit different propagation features. In technical terms, it's a lot more difficult to receive AM radio in a car that has a lot of electromagnetic components. So yeah, AM radio is a bastion of the old days, and you still find AM radios in old classic cars. It wasn't until the 70s when everybody switched to FM. But yeah, that's primarily the reason, is because of the interference.
Okay. If you can touch on some of the factors, where do you see the business overall this year?
It is a little bit mixed in terms of who you're focusing on and what markets you're focusing on. Radio has always been a local medium in the sense that they don't get a large share of their advertising from national ad buys. In most cases, 80% of their ad buys are local. And if you look at specific companies or lots of owners, it's really in those areas that are a little bit more resistant to macroeconomic factors, still have a pretty vibrant local workforce and local businesses. Those seem to be doing fairly well, or declining less, I would say.
Okay.
In those markets that are large metros where there's a lot of competition, especially for streaming and other audio alternatives, it's a little bit more aggressive in terms of where we see that advertising being placed. In most cases, the larger metros are owned by groups like Cumulus and iHeart Media and others. And they've struggled a bit in terms of their over-the-air spot revenue, but they've been making it up on the digital side. So they've been able to grow their digital revenues based on the different apps that they offer, streaming services, the different talent and personalities that they have in their portfolio, as well as just the reach that they have in those markets and the ability to garner the top musicians for events and promotions as well.
Radio revenue is largely ad driven. Is that right? Or are we also talking subscriptions for some of the national players, which you've just alluded to?
Yeah, it is primarily 90% of it is advertising based.
Okay.
I mean, there is a bit of a subscription model in certain cases for iHeart Media, but in most cases it is advertising based. The thing is, the radio business is fairly stable in terms of the local business model. The national business model has been declining over the past 10 years, and the network model as well. So are less new shows being distributed across the network stations. A lot of that has been going to other mediums like YouTube as well as podcasting. for that talent. So gone are the days where you have the Case and Kasems and the Ryan Seacrests that are nationally distributed across the country. And that's who you listen to when you wake up in the morning. It's just not the case anymore.
Yeah.
So I would say from that perspective, if you look at group owners that have good local presence in growing markets, that's where you're going to see the uptick. In other markets, there may be some displacement or owners that may just sell some of their stations in certain markets. But the problem is a lot of these small radio group owners are privately held, family held, and that next generation just hasn't put forth the energy or the investment into kind of building out their station groups.
I got you. One thing I wanted to ask you about, obviously for local TV, the even years of the political money is gigantic. And then you get back to your core in the odd years. Local radio, do they benefit from political at all? And again, maybe given the heightened climate we live in today, could 2026 be a good year for local radio?
Yeah, it could be. And it could have been a lot less in 2024. There was actually some markets where political was fairly good in radio. And we do see a slight upticks in our forecast in those even years where we have political revenue. It's just been a
Right.
very, very small percentage. So if, let's say you've got over $4 billion in the last election that was going to local TV stations,
Right.
radio probably got less than 10% of that.
Oh, really?
In some
Okay.
cases. Yeah. And it wasn't evenly distributed. So it's in some of these markets where they just had an ad blitz and local radio was included in that ad blitz, those districts
Okay.
or in those states where they needed to move the needle on a particular candidate or some sort of proposal, proposition, or something that was politically motivated that they needed to get more call to action. Radio's always been a call to action type of advertising medium. You've got the local car dealerships, most of the brands and everything from the auto perspective, they want to show all their fancy new cars, a video format, whereas radio has come to the dealership, check out our
Right.
cars. We're having this promotion.
Big sale this weekend. Come on by.
Exactly.
Right. I got you. If we go further out to 2030, what are you looking at for 2030 for the business?
Yeah, so I'll just give some top line numbers. So this year, we're expecting for total US radio revenue to be about $14.37 billion. Of that, ad revenue would be about $11.16 billion.
Okay.
So when we talk about ad revenue, it doesn't include network, it doesn't include off air, which is like live events, merchandising,
Right.
and those categories. And that's down 1.9% from prior year. Most of that is because of the political uptick. Looking 5 years out, we see pretty much flattish revenue, dips in non-political years and less of a dip or a little bit up in political years. Digital continuing to grow 5 to 6% throughout the next 5 years. And then if you look at the next 5 years, so 2030 to 2035, since we do 10-year projections, we see a little bit more improvement. Some of that is inflationary. Some of that is just based on the business transitioning to be more of a digital medium and more focus in on live events and other types of businesses that are continuing to grow, podcasting being one of them as well. So we see that growing about 1%, 1 to 2% in the second half of the forecast to about 15.5 billion.
Okay. All right. Is there any sense you could give us relatively stable market going out 5 years, a little bit of growth going out 10? From a geographic perspective, Justin, is there any part of the country that you feel is going to be a lot of growth in, or it's obviously radio's been around for a very long time, so we're all filled in already?
In a case, yes, but we actually look at all the individual radio markets. We just come out with our forecast for all the 200 plus radio markets that are rated by Nielson. And we look at the demographic trends in each one of those markets. And since it's an advertising based medium, demographics matter. So we look at those markets or those regions that are growing faster than others. You look at the Sun Belt, you look at certain areas that are getting movement in terms of economic job prospects as well as retirees. And then there's always been the baby boomers that move from the Northeast down to the South Atlantic, Florida,
Right.
and such. So that's typically what we see in terms of higher growth. Daytona Beach is actually our top radio market for this year in terms of 5-year projections. Jacksonville is another one, a bunch of other Florida markets, Fort Pierce, Destin, and then Austin, Texas. Austin, Texas has seen a lot of professionals moving from the coast to areas where there's a lot of tech and a growing kind of entrepreneurial type of a market.
Sure. Big music scene, college kids.
Big music scene. Yeah,
And
exactly.
all right, let's go back to the ad market. Can you steer us a little bit? You mentioned autos, Mercedes of Monterey, in my case here, Mazda of Marinette. Call to action, come down this weekend. How important is the auto business to local radio?
It's extremely important. It's one of the largest advertisers in a local market in most cases. So you've got your local dealerships, you've got your restaurateurs, you've got the quick service restaurants,
Right.
supermarkets, commercial banking, professional service, lawyers. Those are the big advertisers in the marketplace. But local dealerships have always been consistently at the top. And it's just
Right.
because of the radio format, of call to action. A lot of times they do on sites where they do promotions, bring the DJs or musicians
Sure.
there for
Yep.
the event. So yeah, that's always been the case. From the local dealerships, they've been challenged, especially since the pandemic. There has been lack of supply, and now there's almost oversupply with high interest rates. It's really been a hard market for them just because of kind of the macroeconomics on the dealerships. But they're still trying to move inventory, and radios is one of the best
Right.
mediums to do that.
So I think you mentioned retail, the same situation. Occasionally you have people come, the DJs at the local restaurant, maybe for a game, or they've got a
Right.
band there that night, those kind of things. What are some of the other categories?
Yeah, hospitals. Interestingly enough, there's been a lot of consolidation that's happening in the healthcare industry and hospitals as well. So getting that name out, getting their focus in terms of the aging generation. So there's obviously more need for healthcare services. Yeah.
Sure. Throughout the theme here is localism. Again, you mentioned the Casey Kasem of the world or no more. So you want to have that local voice. Again, how important is that in terms of, yes, the local station has a really interesting DJ. And again, you had mentioned podcasting as well and the possibilities that you get some people maybe coming on the air and talking about local news or their hobbies or local sports. Are those things that some of the dynamics that are even more important today?
I think there are. And you see a lot more collaboration between groups that own both broadcast TV and radio stations as well. You have some synergies there in terms of local news and weather and sports. That's still the case, that those are unique areas of content that are very local. And in a sense, you need to hear them live. That's another aspect of the radio business. It's really a live business, right? There is a case to be said if, you have your favorite sports reporter or journalist, you want to catch up on maybe their podcast. It's really a live local type of medium for sure.
You mentioned the podcast and you think about Spotify and Apple and YouTube, but you said there should be some growth in here for the local guys.
Yeah, I think the sports broadcasters are really the ones that have benefited from that because you can always catch up on a segment or something or get a little bit more in-depth analysis. Let's say if you didn't hear it on the local morning drive, maybe you catch up on it on a podcast. And it's also a way to kind of experiment. So you may have a segment or a show on the live station, and then you have a premium or follow-up content just for your patrons or whatever on the podcast.
We've alluded to this, but again, local concerts, local bands, they need a boost from the radio side as well. We get them on air.
Yeah.
You said they're going to be playing down at the Tiki Bar on Friday night, that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. And it's really because of the changing economics in the music business for artists as well. The days of selling albums, physical medium, and CDs is what is gone. And the artists really need to go out and engage with their fan base. And really, that's the majority of their income is coming from live events business, especially now where you've got the large kind of stadium shows and stuff for its top acts. It's really those local shows that kind of showcase the new talent that's coming up. And maybe the regional focus and maybe different genres that maybe aren't as popular as top 40.
Again, from the station's perspective, if you break that artist, more power to you, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, because they always like to call out where they made their start, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. We'll get into the end here, Justin. Let's go to DC, the nation's capital. Justin, on TV side, there seems to be some momentum toward deregulation, relaxation of the ownership caps from the FCC. What about on the radio side? Are there caps and rules in place around duopolies and the like?
Yeah, so there's no national cap, but there
Okay.
is subcaps, which essentially means it depends on the market size. You can only own 4 FMs and 3 AMs in certain markets. And the radio industry has really been pressuring Congress and the FCC about relaxing those subcaps because they're not only competing with other broadcast stations in their market, they're competing with digital sources like Spotify and Apple Music and others, Pandora. So it's the same situation on the TV side. The video business has got a lot more competition, same with audio.
Sure.
And they feel like they shouldn't be constrained just because of them having an individual market license as opposed to a national digital service like Spotify that's still trying to attract users as well as advertising dollars in those markets.
So you'd mentioned that there's a lot of smaller groups, maybe second or third generation, the kids not as into the business as mom and dad or grandma and grandpa were to get the business off the ground. Do you anticipate that there's going to be a lot of roll up in the radio business in the years ahead?
I think so. If they were able to remove the subcaps, I think there will be a lot of strategic buying in certain
Right.
markets. There may be a lot more swaps, which
Okay.
we kind of saw on the TV side with Scripps and Gray. So I
Right.
think there may be more regional operators in the radio business as opposed to national operators. I think that may be the movement. If we get subcaps removed, you may see more of those kind of smaller operators become regional operators, or you may see new investors coming into the market saying, hey, we can build synergies across the Southeast, let's say, in a
Right.
growing market.
So local becomes more regional, perhaps.
Exactly. Yeah.
To close here, Justin, radio remains a viable media platform for consumers and listeners, investors too. If you make the pitch, if you will, for why the radio business will retain its footing in a good, positive way, I think.
It's still got the reach, and there's been listening trends that come out with every year from Nielson and Edison Research. They still account for almost 4 hours of daily listening across
Really?
ad-supported and ad-free platforms.
Okay.
People still love music and talk radio. So that also includes radio, podcast, streaming music, satellite radio. But radio still accounts for about 47% ad-sponsored audio. So it's still got the reach. It's ubiquitous. Pretty much every car has an AM FM receiver in most cases, and the ROI. So it's a little bit less expensive ad buys, and so it gets right to your audience in the local market.
That concludes this episode of Media Talk. I want to thank our guests, Kagan Principal Analyst Justin Nielson, for sharing his acumen about radio. It's a medium that maybe doesn't garner as much attention as it deserves. Justin, thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you, Mike.
And thanks to all of you for listening. This is Mike Reynolds. Enjoy some tunes or talk on your radio. We'll catch up soon on the next installment of Media Talk.